Hello, so today I'm going to do a little bit of a fun video, and we're going to talk a little bit about Set 10 Revival and one of my favorite comps from the Set 10 Revival, which is Riven Reroll. So this was a comp that I played a lot back in Set 10, and it was one of the first comps that I really started to understand the game, and it's one of the cruxes, one of the crutches that I used to get to Masters for the first time, because when I started playing in Set 9, and the first time I hit Masters was in Set 10. So for all of those that are interested or have been sticking around with the channel, please make sure to like and subscribe. Of course, I usually do guides, and I'm going to continue to do Set 14 content. I just want to do one little Set Revival content for today as a little bit of for fun. Tomorrow will be best comms for Set 14, and I'm going to continue with Set 14 related guides, so don't worry about that if that's what you come to this channel for. But I thought it'd be funny to just talk a lot about Riven, because I still, ingrained in my memory, remember so much about this comp. Back in the day, back when nobody watched this channel, and I had my videos were getting like very little views, I was playing so much Riven. I played so many games of this comp. This was by far like it just goes on and on and on and on. You can see like 27 views. I got the 8-bit cash out. I did everything. This was back in the times of Set 10. So I thought it'd be fun to just kind of talk about the comp, and if you're playing Set Revival, this could be a comp that you can try out, and I can kind of explain the moving parts in a similar way that I do my current content, because that's not something that I was doing back then. Usually I was just posting VOD reviews back then. But anyways, Riven to me was the coolest comp in the game for two reasons. Number one, Set 10 towards the end of it kind of devolved into mostly a reroll set. The reason is that the main set mechanic in Set 10 is that you can just buy a unit in your shop, and it was called a headliner, and the headliner basically would have an extra trait active. So one of their traits, so in this case Riven is an 8-bit and an edgelord, it would have that basically get increased by 1. So if you're somebody who loves to play those vertical traits or loves to see those vertical trait things, you would basically just get a +1 to one of your traits. Additionally, the unit in your shop would be upgraded as a 2-star unit. So if you see a Riven in your shop, whether it's the 8-bit headliner or the edgelord headliner, the headliner Riven would be upgraded to 2-star. So that was a huge thing, especially when trying to play around rerolls, especially 3-cost rerolls. When you're trying to hit a 3-star, you get 3 copies of the unit for free, which helped the comp become very stable and very powerful very early on. This made rerolls really powerful, along with some other mechanics of other reroll lines being particularly strong. There was also a super fan trait where it would give a headliner an extra item. So there's lots of stuff that kind of made the set kind of go more towards reroll. And for me, this was the only one that I found fun, because 8-bit is a scaling trait, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But basically, if we're thinking about the board will look like this. You're trying to play around Riven Reroll, so you're going to play into the Riven traits, and those are going to be your edgelords and your 8-bits. Excuse me, I missed one unit. Let's just put this on here. But basically, your board would look something like this. Of course, the Riven would be the headliner, so we would drop a unit eventually, but basically what you would do is you would play into the edgelord trait and the 8-bit trait. So first of all, edgelords, the way edgelords work is that you basically just gain a bunch of attack speed, and you also have this dashing effect, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. 8-bit was really cool, and to this day I still have not had as much fun as I did with 8-bit. I think people always ask me what my favorite traits are. I usually say strategist, but 8-bit's a close second. Basically with 8-bit, you keep track of your damage dealing, so as much damage as you do to enemy champions, and then you would slowly ramp up this little counter at a little arcade box. And if you know anything about me, I grew up playing fighting games and stuff like that. I have my own arcade stick. I went to tournaments and stuff, so I love the whole 8-bit aesthetic. But basically the little arcade machine would ramp up, it would count up, and then you would get extra AD. So with 2, 4, and 6 8-bit, after each one, you would get more AD. And then there was also this chase, like win condition, that if you had 6 8-bit, which required you to have a spatula, then you would then get like a giga cash out that would be like an instant win. Similar to like some of the other cash out traits that we've seen in the past. But this one was just really cool, so I recommend trying it out. But basically when you're playing this comp, it worked really well because of a lot of pieces that made it kind of like anti-meta, or kind of a little bit different than some of the other comps out there, that allowed you to have a lot of points of stabilization. But typically speaking, what you would have is you'd be playing around 5 edgelord and 4 8-bit. We'll talk about spat variations in a second, but typically speaking, you'd be going for Riven 3-star, and there's a lot of other units you can hit, but sometimes you'd also go for Yone 3-star, and you would dual carry between the two of them, but a lot of times you would have just enough gold to hit the Riven 3-star. As you can see, this board doesn't look like a reroll comp because there are so many different units on the board. So let's just pretend that we have 8-bit headliner for Riven. Basically, then you would be able to drop a unit, and then you can just play the 5 edgelord, 4 8-bit as your final board, and then just level, and you would have a board that looks something like this. You would get in pentakill just because it would help out your pentakill champions, and a lot of times you'd be playing around this Viego. But basically, the way that it would work, Riven, one of the cool things about her, the best item on her almost always was QSS, which is a little bit weird because sometimes you see it as usually like a high cap item or you build it later. You usually prioritize Quicksilver for Riven, which was great because it's an awkward use of components. You have a cloak and you have a glove, so it actually made her very easy to itemize because a lot of times you can, even if you're win streaking, you can find a cloak pretty easily in the game, and then glove isn't too hard to find either. But basically, the reason QSS is so good on her is because if you read Riven's ability, her extra attacks deal bonus physical damage. So basically, when she casts, she would just be pumping out damage by doing extra auto attacks. So because of that, you want a lot of attack speed and you want to be uninterrupted. You just want to keep attacking as much as possible. Think like a lot of other units where you just want to get as many auto attacks in as possible. QSS is really good because it gives you a lot of upfront attack speed, and for those first couple seconds with the immunity to crowd control, you basically gain a shit ton of attack speed while also being uninterruptible, constantly attacking. So this Riven will just pump out damage and do an absurd amount of damage. After that, you want to give her some sort of sustain style item. So a lot of times what you would do is you would give her a Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster, not super essential, but you would some sort of Omnivamp is going to go a long way. And then the last item, you often would try and like scale up that attack damage that you would get, because 8-bit you'd be ramping up your AD over time. So if you get multiple cash outs, the Riven will eventually have a huge amount of AD. So you want to scale that by either crit or by damage amp, and damage amp usually works pretty well. Giant Slayer was a general go-to item with Riven. However, the thing that made this comp so great, and the reason I liked it a lot, is because there were so many different builds to play with the Riven because you have so much AD from 8-bit in the first place. So, for example, instead of playing around Bloodthirster and Giant Slayer, sometimes if you want to make the Riven more of a drain tank, you would basically go with QSS, and then you can even go with a Titans. Because Titans was decent. It's not the best, but you can basically gain some extra stats as well as some tankiness, so it helps you to be more of like a drain tank build. You can also go for different Omnivamp items like a Hodge, and in some cases, because you have so much AD, you don't even care that much about Hodge or Bloodthirster as your healing item. If you're pressed for items, you can even convert some of your items into like a Hextech Gunblade and just give yourself Omnivamp that way, because it will still work out because you're gonna have so much AD, and then you can go for Hextech Gunblade and QSS. Now, in terms of like the best set of items, I think it's usually like the first one that I showed you, or that's how it was when the set was in set 10. But of course, you had so many different types of builds, you had so many options that basically any components that you got, it felt like you could make items for this Riven, because, you know, Quicksilver, pretty easy to make. If you have one sword, that can either be your Omnivamp in the form of Bloodthirster or in the form of Gunblade. If you get a tier, you can make a Hodge. If you get bow and you get chainmail, you can make Titans. No matter what your components were, you had a lot of different paths, as long as you can make one Omnivamp, QSS, and something else. And if you see here, a lot of these builds, especially the main build that I showed here, you'll see that QSS and Bloodthirster both use a cloak. So a lot of times on Carousel, you're actually prioritizing cloak, which was weird, but also really good because nobody really cared about getting a cloak. Everybody wants a sword, everybody wants a tier, everybody wants a rod, people want bows, and you just show up late to the party and be like, oh, where's my cloak? I need my cloak for my Riven. It was beautiful. It was absolutely amazing. So usually you itemize your Riven, something that looks kind of like that. Of course, things can change, but just note you need your QSS. Then your secondary damage dealer a lot of times would end up actually being Viego. Viego works similar to how he does in set 14. If you're a set 14 enjoyer, he basically just jumps and hits like a giant AoE. So what you would do at Viego is you would then put your other items on the Viego. So, or like your, what's it called? Your utility items, a lot of times you would put on the Viego. What that would mean is you would put, like your Morello, for example, can go on Viego. He also has a little bit of like an AP scaling, so it actually works out pretty well because you basically just take some increased damage with his AP scaling, so AP items were also okay on him. And then you can put other Omnivamp items on him, other melee style items, but a lot of times he was your main Morello holder. Additionally, you also had high cap around finding Caitlyn items later in the game. Caitlyn also scales off that 8-bit effect, so if you can get the Caitlyn up to snuff, then you can put the extra AD items or extra damage on the Caitlyn as well. Caitlyn, a lot of times, she's kind of similar to like Xayah. She would just do like explosive damage. So you'd usually put like either some form of mana generation. So a lot of times like it would be like a Shojin or something, or you just put her in like full damage build. You can just put her with like the IE Last Whisperer and just have her like absolutely explode and delete units. Additionally, because you're rolling for Riven, you can often pick up a lot of the other units. You can pick up Garens to get 3-star Garen. You can also try and 3-star your Mordekaiser, which worked as a frontline unit, having Sentinel in. And you can also 3-star your Yone if you really wanted to have him do some extra damage. Now here, we're just showing this as a form of like 5-8 edgelord for 8-bit. Obviously, until you get to this point, a lot of times 4-8-bit was the one that you would go for. If you don't have this type of setup, then a lot of times you would just drop the 8-bit. If you had like an edgelord headliner, then you would just play towards 5 edgelord in your mid game, and it would be a very similar board. You would just swap out, like here I just put this the Yasuo here just to show for the synergies, but you can put in like, you know, the Corki to fill in if you have the edgelord version, and then your high cap you can play 7 edgelord if you find a Kayn, which just gives you a lot of attack speed. So one of the cool things about this comp is that it absolutely deleted certain other comps. It was known at the time that if you were playing edgelord Riven, you would basically never lose to a comp like Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate, there was like the disco trait. You know, of course, if it's new to you, it might be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm giving you like a little bit of a guide, but not too much of a guide. But basically the idea was, with these edgelords, one of the main effects of edgelord that was really cool was the fact that positioning mattered a lot when you played around this comp. When your target dropped below 50 health, they would dash through the enemy. So what does that mean? Well, let's just put an enemy here, and let's just put a Riven, for example. What would happen is you can very easily get wrapped, so they wouldn't dive the backline. But let's say you see we have our Riven, we have our Gragas here, that's a frontline unit for this disco trait. What would happen is the Riven would, after getting this unit down to a certain HP threshold, would then dash through them. By dashing through them, they would end up on the opposite side of the hex. So if you see them on this side of the hexagon, so then the opposite side would be that side of the hexagon. Draw a line through them in order to attack. And what would happen is this Riven, who is just like constantly dealing a shit ton of damage, QSS, attacking, uninterruptible, unable to be stunned, would basically just kill the frontline unit and then wrap towards the backline. You can actually path out this dashing effect to get to the backline and just instantly kill them. For comps that ramped up like Disco, Disco was like, you know, the Twisted Fate did like a similar like Guinsoo style like ramp up effect type of build. So it wasn't like burst damage. This comp would never be able to burst down this Riven, and this Riven would just keep dashing through units until she deleted everybody on the enemy's board. So a lot of the times what you're trying to do is find positionings such that your edgelords actually get good placements, or good placements through the enemy lines. So when you're playing this comp, for example, if you have a Gragas and they have like, let's just put 2 Gragases, for example, Gragai maybe is how you would say it. A lot of times it's like a 50-50 which way you're going to dash through these. So a lot of times, even though Riven could drain tank pretty effectively, you actually second roll your Riven to make sure that you're dashing through the correct Gragas. Like if I want to wrap the backline, a lot of times if you position your unit 2 hexes away, so here it's a 50-50 which Gragas I'm going to jump through, and dashing here towards the middle isn't as good as dashing this way towards the edge, because if you dash closer to the edge, you have a better chance of wrapping and killing a backline unit. So what you would actually do is you position your Riven 2 hexes away, because with 2 hexes away, this Riven will always target the closest unit, so it will walk up and then target this way if there's a unit in the way here, right? It would target like this. So a lot of times you can do weird positioning like this. It would walk up, target here, and kill this unit, which was absolutely beautiful. And then you can get your wraps a little bit easier. And that didn't always work. Like there's obviously situations like, you know, if they position around it and then like the units walk up, the Riven can like retarget somebody else. But that's just like another helpful trick when you're playing this comp. If you really want to target one particular unit, it helps to target a weak unit that the Riven can just dash through and kill to make sure that it dies early enough so that the Riven can then wrap the back line. What you could do is something like that. Position 2 hexes away. Now, the other thing that was really great with this comp is this comp always had a latent win condition, which is 6-8-bit. So if you have 8-bit Riven, which a lot of times you can't really read which Riven you would get unless you're in a really good spot. So like, you know, it'd be like, you know, you either get 8-bit Riven or you get edgelord Riven. A lot of times if you have 8-bit Riven, then you have the potential with a spatula to get 6-8-bit. So 6-8-bit scales your damage up tremendously, because your Riven will do a shit ton of damage, and also your Caitlyn, which we've been talking about like kind of like in the background, because this is more of an edgelord kind of comp that we're talking about. This Caitlyn, if you have her 2-star, would also just absolutely delete and easily win and just destroy the enemy carries pretty effectively, and you had lots of high cap potential with that. But what would happen a lot of the times is with 6-8-bit, you would ramp up your AD so high that between the Riven just being unable to kill and just like deleting all the front line, and the Caitlyn then sniping and doing all sorts of damage to all sorts of units, because she would basically just target the furthest enemies, so she had like really good positioning effects as well. You can often like put your Caitlyn and your Riven in such a way that you're sniping backline units and ending the fight within the first couple seconds of the fight, especially with 6-8-bit. So if you have an 8-bit spat, there's many different holders of it. Of course, you would drop down your edgelords quite a bit at this point, so sometimes you don't even play the Yone, and you would play variations of this where you would be able to fit in your Corki, which is an early unit, to play your 6-8-bit, especially to fit it in early, because it's just so much explosive damage. Additionally, 6-8-bit has its grand prize, which if you cash it out, you then just get like infinite resource. You get infinite gold, all these item drops, duplicator drops. Basically, the machine just keeps pumping out crap, and you just can use that to cap absolutely absurdly high. A lot of times you can get 3-star 5 costs, and you just win the game for free. So 6-8-bit was always like that chase condition that you can get, but also gave this comp, which was a reroll comp that's already very consistent and already really capable of going top 4, it gave it the potential to also like completely win out and undeniably win no matter what if you ever get dropped a spat, or if you ever find the 8-bit spat in some way to put on a unit. Additionally, with this board, you can also cap out really high with Jazz. So Jazz was a trait that basically for all the traits that you have active, you can then put them in. So playing around some of the Jazz units actually, I'll explain that a little bit better. Jazz basically worked like some of the augments that you see this set, that for all the traits you have active, you then get bonus stats. So high cap, a lot of times you can actually play like with very little front line, and you can just play towards like putting in some of the Jazz units. It was like usually this and MF, if I recall correctly. And then you have a really good synergy grid here where you activate rapid fire and big shot, but you can still keep everything active, and you would basically just get the extra Jazz bonuses, which was really nice. So that's another way to high cap this board. A lot of times if you're playing this version, a lot of times you really want to have Mordekaiser 3 as well, just to give yourself a little bit of breathing room with some frontline units that you can put some frontline items on. But this also gave you an insanely high cap. This is more limited to the 8-bit emblem, and then additionally you could also play around other big shot units, because this 8-bit emblem basically it would just give you like infinite AD. That's the way you could look at it. So any unit that was an AD unit, even like an Ezreal who can make use of the big shot trait, he would be a great holder that you can just shove it on and just like absolutely wreck all sorts of boards. But this was a fun comp that I like to play. I'm probably going to play a little bit on stream tomorrow, and maybe do some viewer lobbies. I'll probably just like hard force just playing Riven, because I don't really care too much about the set revival that much, but this is a comp that I still remember pretty well, so I might just play this one a little bit just to relive that dream of me cashing out 8-bit, which was some of the most fun I've had in TFT in a long time. But anyways, that's like a little crash course on the comp. Of course, positioning matters a lot with this comp, both positioning your Caitlyn, which is like your high cap that you put the items on after you itemize towards your Riven, as well as the positioning on the Riven to make sure that you get your dashes pretty effectively. Always remember you dash through the targets, so try and find positions such that your Riven stays towards the edges of the board and then can try and wrap the enemy backline. A lot of times you end up putting your units on opposite sides, because if the Riven wraps the backline, then the Caitlyn can finish them off, or vice versa, and you want your Viego obviously to also apply those effects using his AoE abilities. Additionally, if you're looking for pivot options or other things you can play out of this, you can actually drop a lot of these 8-bit units, and often you would be able to play around Yone reroll. That was a popular option as well. I didn't really like the Yone reroll too much, but usually you would play Yone with Heartsteel or out of Heartsteel, which was the lose streak trait. So if somebody is playing Yone, be careful, because they might go for Riven and Yone together. That is a common option that sometimes people do, but typically if you're playing the Riven version, you would just leave the Yone players alone, and there would be like this implicit pact of, if you're Yone reroll, you hit your Yones, I won't hold that many, and I'll just play Riven, I'll stay in my own lane. And you know, unless they were really like out to get you, you would usually like keep in your own lanes, and you both were able to hit and both able to top 4. That's usually what ended up happening. But either way, This was a 3-cost reroll that was really prevalent and had a really high cap, and you had really good potential, especially with the 8-bit emblem, to reach those like ungodly levels of just like hitting stuff. If you're an enjoyer of cash out traits and you're an enjoyer of just like, you know, having something where a number ticks up and you see the number get bigger and bigger, and then you get like gold and stuff like Easter egg style things, this was a comp that not only was consistent and really good at playing around the current set, or not the current set, playing around the set at the time and playing within like whichever comps were really good. It also had really good matchups. There were very few matchups that were extremely bad for Riven, and it was also like, you know, has that fun cash out trait. So, you know, you can have fun with it, you can go for like silly stuff, but you can also be very consistent and just like play it and have like a reliable outcome a lot of the time that you can predict, and often outskill, because a lot of skill involved in positioning your units with this comp, which is why I really liked it in the first place. So that's Riven Reroll. If you want to see back in the day what it looked like, you know, there's some videos here. They're obviously going to be way worse than my skill level now. This was right when I just hit Masters, so this was me 0 LP Masters player, so of course they're going to be like whatever, and also probably just me tilted and whatever. But there's also like the clip, I think, somewhere on my channel of me hitting, probably in shorts, of me hitting like the 8-bit cash out somewhere, you know, and just getting everything. You know, lots of fun stuff if you want to reminisce of set 10, or if set 10 was one of your more enjoyed ones. For me, it's like I'm just gonna play it a little bit, obviously, and then I'll probably go back to doing set 14 content. So tomorrow, like I said, we're gonna talk about set 14, new patch for set 14. I might play a little bit of set 10, and then, like, you know, we're gonna get back to like constant set 14 content. So don't worry if that's what you're looking forward to. If you want to see more set 10 content, you know, make sure to, you know, like and appreciate this video, and maybe I'll do some other guides for the set 10 comms if you're more interested in playing that, because I know that set 10 was more popular for most people compared to set 14. A lot of people are thinking about just playing the set 10 revival, so I can continue to do guides similar to that, maybe with more production value if that's what people want from me, but it all starts with this video doing a little bit better. But thank you for watching, have a great day, and see ya. Bye bye.